Welcome to Amy's Bookshelf Reviews podcast. Conversations, revelations, and inspirations behind the books. You never know where the conversation will lead us, so let's find out.
Good evening, listeners. I'm Amy Shannon. Tonight we have a guest with us, so thank you for joining us. Will you please introduce yourself and let people know how they can connect with you?
Thank you, Amy. I'm Kaia Gallagher. I'm the author of Candles for the Defiant. I have a website, www.kaiagallagher.com, which I believe is in the podcast notes.
Yep.
And my book is available through Amazon as well as through local booksellers.
That will also be in the description of the podcast where they can buy your book.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So, Candles for the Defiant. I found the title very interesting. So I'm going to start out with, how did you come up with something like that? I mean, that's really, it was like, it stood out to me, you know?
Yeah, well, in Estonia, there is a custom on Christmas Eve whereby Estonians go to local cemeteries and light candles at the grave sites of their loved ones who have departed. And as I will explain when I describe my book is about heroes from World War II who were buried in unknown graves. And so this is my way to honor their patriotism by lighting a virtual candle, if you will, for their defiance and heroism.
That's beautiful. No, I like that. I mean, I even just the, putting candles on their graves, honoring them, I think that is magnificent. And you using your work to also honor those who have been buried or no one knows where they are. So I want to, that is just very remarkable and very respectful. So I want to thank you for doing something like that because it's amazing.
Of course.
I personally like to, I've been doing local history stuff, and one of the things I like is visiting the cemeteries and kind of going through and realizing, like for my work, that I'm not going to pick just the people that I know, like are famous in one way or the other, but people that just lived their lives and passed away, and maybe they don't have anyone else to share their story. So that is just a wonderful thought. And I can't wait to dive into this book because it's on my pile. uh, so, what made you think about writing something like this? I mean, what inspired you to do that besides the lighting of the candles?
Well, like many authors who write family memoirs, my book was a lifelong journey. When I was growing up, none of my Estonian relatives wanted to talk about what happened during World War II or to describe their former lives in Estonia. So for many years, I believed I would never be able to recover this part of my family history, in particular, since after the Soviets took over Estonia at the end of World War II, they prohibited travel in and out of the country. So essentially, my connections to Estonia were totally cut off. Then in 1994, my brother Michael moved to Estonia after Estonia was once again able to become independent after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And I, with his help, traveled to Estonia several times. And then in 2018, with my brother's help, I recovered family files that had been preserved in the Estonian National Archives. It revealed my family's World War II history. I also began interviewing my mother to recover her stories and started to piece together what actually is a less well-known story of what happened in Estonia during World War II. And I was finally able to publish my book in 2024.
Well, that is wonderful. I mean, I love learning about family history, and that just we, it's, to me, it's like it's sad and bittersweet, but yet you finally were able to get information that you needed. You probably found out things that you didn't know about. And how hard was it to talk to your mother about these things?
Well, Estonians are known to be very stoic, and my mother certainly was that. And she would answer my questions, but she was not a storyteller, I'll just sort of say. So, for example, when I would ask her, well, how did you leave Estonia on the last possible day before the Soviets took over the country? And she said, well, we left on a boat. No, that was her answer.
Oh, yeah.
So
it without elaboration. Yeah. Okay.
There you go. She would say, well, what else do you want to know? And
how big was the boat?
Yeah, right. And so I discovered that boat, which was part of a German convoy, there were 3 of the ships that left Tallinn Harbor, again, just hours before Estonia was taken over by the Soviets. And the 3 boats were in the Baltic Sea headed towards the harbor of Danzig, and Soviet airplanes attacked the convoy. And so one of the boats, which was actually the Red Cross boat, was sunk. Unfortunately, my mother's boat was spared, and she watched this boat go down, and fortunately then managed to arrive at Danzig Harbor. So obviously there was a very dramatic story about being on that boat, but I had to actually recover books that other Estonian survivors had written to learn more about that. And, part of it is, of course, anybody that's experienced trauma doesn't really want to relive it. And so, right. In addition to not particularly wanting to tell a lot of stories or talk about herself, I think, this was very difficult history for her to remember.
Yeah, that sometimes that happens. It's very, you don't want to relive the trauma. And that's totally understandable. But at least you were able to, find some answers. And it probably, when you saw this, you're probably like, oh, well, that's why she didn't want to talk about it. Why she said she left on a boat. So, yeah, so I think that's very interesting. You mentioned earlier that you would like to read an excerpt. If you wanted to do that now, you could.
Okay, sure. Excited to learn more about the independent country Estonia had become, I returned in 2005 with my husband and 2 teenage children. With my brother Michael's help, we traveled to the village of Paistu to visit Sova, the farm that my grandfather's family had owned before the war. The Estonian countryside was bucolic, with sleepy hillsides where cattle grazed next to fields of alfalfa and rye. The dirt roads were dusty, and since there were few signs, we made several wrong turns before finding the country lane that led to the site where the Vars family had lived for hundreds of years. Based on the available written records I was able to review, I discovered that generations of my Estonian relatives had lived in the Paistu region dating from the 17th century. Our family's connection to this land most likely extended back even further, since prior to being emancipated in 1816, Estonian serfs were not able to travel away from their local communities. They remained in place for centuries, growing the crops that enabled them to survive while they endured outbreaks of plague, years of famine, and the havoc caused by warring armies. At the end of the 19th century, my great-grandfather Jan Vars was proud when he became the first in his family to own his farm instead of leasing it from the local German manor lord. He then doubled his acreage after he married Anne Janssen, who lived on a neighboring property. By the time he died in 1916, at the age of 58, Jan had spent a lifetime toiling in his fields as he worked to create an enduring heritage for his family and for those who were still to come. 3 decades after my great-grandfather's death, the Soviet Union imposed its post-war occupation on Estonia and forced my great-grandmother Anne to leave the family farm after it was appropriated into a local collective in the late 1940s. When one of my grandfather's relatives regained possession of the property in 1991, after Estonia became independent, she sold it to some Finnish investors. So at the time, when my family visited the site in 2005, we found it to be uninhabited, desolate, and forlorn. Knee-high weeds filled the courtyard in front of the family's two-story house, where the windows and doors were boarded shut. To one side, we noticed a rundown barn with a sloping roof that was in obvious need of repair. Other than the sound of chirping crickets, there were no signs of life. 20 yards from the house, we found the oak tree that my great-grandmother Anne had planted on the spot where my great-grandfather lost his life in a farming accident. After nearly 100 years, the tree towered over the field, but its white skeletal frame was barren. The oak had died, leaving behind only a stark shadow of the solid tree that once spread its limbs over the field. By the time we visited, it had become a lonely sentinel, standing guard over a vacant farmhouse and a wide swath of fallow fields. What trace remained in my own life from the attachment my Estonian relatives once placed in the farmland they owned and cultivated? Along with other members of my immediate family, my home was thousands of miles from these fields that my great-grandfather had at one time nurtured. Moreover, my connection to my Estonian heritage had been largely severed while I was growing up, since the Soviets prohibited travel in and out of the Baltic countries. Questions about my connection to my family's past continued to haunt me.
Wow. That must have been heartbreaking, seeing that. So the people that bought it did nothing with it.
No.
So do they still own that? I mean, is that?
I assume it was a land investment, that they were just holding on to the property, assuming that it would gain value over time.
Well, I am very sorry, because I know how, those type of connections, where you grew up, where your family came from, and being able to see, be on that land. I mean, obviously it's devastating, but did you feel like, I don't know, like you're probably upset about its decay, but did you have a like feeling of connection to your grandfather or your grandmother?
My grandparents moved to the United States after the war, and unfortunately, neither one of them were particularly comfortable speaking English. And so, unfortunately, they were unable to share a lot of what otherwise would have been my family history. And as I said, like my mother, neither one of them really wanted to talk about Estonia. It was just too heartbreaking for them to have left everything behind.
Well, I think it's wonderful that you are sharing your story, your family's story. And I'm guessing, but there are probably more people with, Estonian heritage that probably endured things just like your family had.
Yes, that is correct.
You can't go, you can't leave your country, can't leave where you live, and all you have is your family and your land, and then you don't have the land anymore. You just
Well, what's interesting to me, Amy, is that many Americans who are interested in World War II focus on what happened within the United States. So for many Americans, World War II began with Pearl Harbor or with D-Day. But in reality, in Estonia, World War II began in 1939. After Hitler invaded Poland, the Soviets moved in and created military bases in Estonia in September of 39. And then in 1940, they orchestrated fake elections and took over the country's government, hospitals, schools. And at that point, my mother's sister's fiance was recruited to join the Communist Party, and he chose to do so with the intent of spying for the Estonians. So his name was Bruno Kukmakul, and for the next year, he pretended to be a communist. Unfortunately, the next summer, the Germans invaded Estonia, and when they arrived, anybody with a Communist Party card was considered to be a traitor. So Bruno was arrested, and the files that I found at the Estonian National Archives were his police records. So there was just the information about the police investigation, the interviews, there were support letters, but there were also 25 pages that Bruno had written in his own defense, explaining who he had helped and what he had tried to do and how he had undermined the Communist Party. So that convinced the Estonians, but unfortunately the Germans believed that anyone who was a communist needed to be eliminated. So he unfortunately was executed. I tell you this because the occupations of Estonia by the Soviets and then by the Germans and then by the Soviets were brutal times. I mean, thousands of Estonians were executed. Many more were deported. Both countries were determined to erase Estonia's national identity. So it's a tribute to Estonians that then now, after 50 years of Soviet occupation, the Estonians were determined to once again become independent. And this is actually part of Estonian history for thousands of years. And so let me just mention, Estonia is a rocky peninsula that's just south of Finland and due east of Sweden on the Baltic Sea. And over thousands of years, this country was occupied by its more aggressive neighbors. So by the Soviets, by the Germans, by the Russians, by the Germans, by the Swedes, by the Danes, by the Germans, by the Russians. And so the country was only independent after the end of World War I, when the Tsar's empire dissolved, and it was able to declare its independence, 1921. And then it was only independent for 20 years until the outbreak of World War II. So in 1939, 1940, as I said, the Soviets came in and took over the country, and then that occupation continued for 50 more years after the war. So it's a fascinating, tragic, and it's a story of Bruno's story is a story that's emblematic of what happened to Estonians that were caught in the middle. There was no way to be, they were going to be called traitors by the Soviets if they collaborated with the Germans. They were going to be traitors if they collaborated with the Soviets, by the Germans, by the Soviets, by the Germans. There was just no middle ground. And so Bruno's story, I think, is an important one and is a timely one, because Putin is still talking about how the Baltics really should become part of what he calls Greater Russia. The same story that he tells about Ukraine, that these aren't legitimate countries.
It's ridiculous. And I can just imagine that based off of what you said, Bruno being executed, he probably wasn't the only one. So there may have been families where their bloodline ended at that point.
Yes.
And so when I discover that through my research, a lot of times at a certain point your bloodline ends for whatever reason. But I believe that everybody has a story, and it should be shared, and they should be remembered. And I can tell that obviously this is, well, it's your family. It's very personal to you. And just someone from me, and I'm going to read that. And obviously I'm going to have to bring some tissues with me when I sit down to read it. But I think it is, you are doing your family heritage a service. You are honoring those who are lost. A man like Bruno, just imagine what what was going through his mind. He wanted to protect the Estonians, and he gave his life for that, no matter what. But still, it's heartbreaking. But it also, I think maybe some people just don't know or aren't aware of the tragedy that the Estonians underwent. And you're right, in the U.S., because they entered, the World War II after Pearl Harbor, um, and you know, and that's when people think of it. Some people don't remember, or don't don't want to, that the war started way before Japan decided to bring the United States into it. And until I spoke with you, I am aware of Estonia, but I didn't realize their history. So I am really interested in it, in reading your work. And I think that it is, you have done an honor, and you are very brave for writing this book and sharing it with the world, because I think it's something that is very important.
Well,
And I love the fact that you were doing history. And I I do have a segment on this show that is called The Living Past. And anyone who has come on my show, and then, family history, whatever type of history, I'd love to have you back on the show for that particular segment sometime.
I'd be happy to join you for that segment.
Thank you very much. I do appreciate it. I use it. I love history. I love family, local, world, and the I didn't realize the horrors that the Estonians had to go through. I mean, when you think about it, you're thinking of, some people don't realize that they were caught in the middle between the Soviets and Germany. And then, other people were, because they weren't German. If you weren't German, then you weren't basically anything. So I, again, just I can't wait to read this book. And once I get it read, then I'll let you know. We'll schedule a time for you to come back, because I think that this is amazing. And I hope that did your family read it?
Well, I have two brothers and two sisters, and they have been very supportive, and have helped promote my book. I have actually some Canadian cousins who have helped me share this story in Canada. So yeah, my siblings are very proud, that I've been able to recover this story, because the other point I made earlier is that after the Soviets took over Estonia at the end of World War II, they actually suppressed a lot of the history of what happened. So for 50 years, it wasn't just that I couldn't find my family story. This story was just not available. And it was only in 1994, after Estonia became independent, that the president, Leonard Meri, convened an international commission of historians to recover the history of what happened. And they created a 1,000-page compendium. So the first volume is what happened during the first Soviet occupation. The second one's the German occupation. A third is the second Soviet occupation, so 1,000 pages. And so a lot of the history that I was able to recover, benefited from the fact that the Estonians themselves were really committed to recovering the history and telling the true story.
That is amazing. And they had to wait so long to tell the story. But I want to thank you for being on the show. And as soon as I read your book, I'll let you know. We can schedule another time for you to come back. And
Okay.
thank you, audience, for listening. And feel free to comment on this show or any show. And join me again next week. And if you want to check out my work, just Google me. I'm Amy Shannon. Be safe, be well, and always be kind.
Thank you for listening to Amy's Bookshelf Reviews podcast. If you wish to be a guest on the show, you can go to amysbookshelfreviews.com/podcast and schedule your pre-recording. Please follow this podcast on Spotify, even if you listen to it on other streaming sites. Also, this podcast is on every first Monday and last Monday of the month at 7 p.m. and every Sunday at 6 and 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm Amy Shannon. Be safe, be well, and always be kind.